In the early morning hours of the 18th of January 1945, the British troops of C Company of the 1st Battalion Leicestershire Regiment of the 49th West Riding Division were holding the Dutch town of Zetten when they came under attack from a battalion of German paratroopers. Advancing across the snow-covered fields to the north, the Germans caught C Company by surprise and very quickly infiltrated into the British positions. On the company's right flank, the forward defences were swiftly overwhelmed, and by 0830 the platoon holding that sector had been forced back to a singular house. Here the platoon commander, Lieutenant Percy Gardiner, decided that his platoon would not fall back any further, and instead he directed his men to take up firing positions and encouraged them to hold their ground at all costs. For his leadership that day, Lieutenant Gardiner was awarded the Military Cross, with his citation stating that his platoon headquarters and one section were attacked from front, from rear and from the right. The house was under heavy bazooka fire and repeated attempts were made from all three sides to rush it. Lieutenant Gardiner displayed throughout the action courage, determination and initiative, going from post to post and himself at times using the brain gun on the side most threatened. He beat off many attacks and inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy. Lieutenant Gardiner's courage, determination and forceful personality and coolness under all circumstances were an inspiration to his men and were responsible for preventing a vital part of the position from being overrun. Meanwhile, as Lieutenant Gardiner's platoon valiantly held the right flank, over on C Company's left, the situation was rapidly deteriorating as the British platoon holding that sector became surrounded and cut off from the rest of the company. By late morning, this platoon had suffered heavy casualties and was barely holding on, with the German paratroopers having seized complete control over western Zetten. Given this situation and the fact that they were outnumbered, C Company sent out a request for reinforcements. This request was immediately granted and a couple of Wasp flamethrower carriers were dispatched to Zetten with orders to counterattack the enemy. However, as soon as they arrived in the town, the icy roads made it impossible for the Wasps to get forward and engage with the enemy, and as a result, their crews decided to abandon their vehicles and join C Company as regular foot soldiers. In consequence, C Company sent out a second request for more reinforcements. This was again granted, and this time D Company of the 1st Leicesters were sent in, along with 4 Sherman tanks from the Canadian 6th Armoured Regiment of the 2nd Armoured Brigade. Arriving on the scene just after 0900, these troops established contact with C Company in eastern Zetten and held a short meeting, during which it was agreed that D Company, together with the Shermans, would attack as soon as possible into the western part of the town with the aim of retaking the area and linking up with the platoon under siege there. An after-action report, written by an unknown officer of the Canadian 6th Armoured Regiment, details: I was briefed by C Company on the situation. The left flank was the first job they wanted done. As we only had about 200 yards of street to work from, and only a few spots of that from which we could actually engage targets, we decided to use only the 2 75mm Shermans. Moving up, I put a few armoured piercing in the back door of one house, then went forward to a crossroads where I could see 3 houses. The other 75mm Sherman put a few more armoured piercing into the back door of my first target, then moved up behind me and we engaged houses with high explosive and armoured piercing and coaxial machine gun for nearly 25 minutes. The infantry then went house clearing and produced 5 live bodies, but I never did hear the dead and wounded score. During this time, a machine gun in the building 75 yards in front had given us a few bursts, doing no great harm. We switched immediately to these targets and poured a generous amount from all guns for about 10 minutes. At this time, 2 sections of infantry moved forward. We continued with coax until they were within a few yards of the first house. They cleared the first few houses and were starting back when a machine gun opened up from around a bend in the street. There was a heavy concertina obstacle in front of me, so 2 men slipped up from behind and pulled it aside. I moved forward and sprayed the street while the sections came out. This completed the left flank task. By 1200 on the 18th of January, the British Canadian force had retaken the western part of Zetten and, more importantly, had linked up with the remnants of the besieged platoon of C Company. The focus was then turned to strengthening Lieutenant Percy Gardiner's platoon on the right flank, a task that was completed by 1400. Shortly thereafter, with the situation having stabilised and the Germans now on the defensive, the 4 Canadian Sherman tanks were withdrawn to rest and refit, whilst D Company took over from C for responsibility for Zetten. In addition, 2 platoons from the 2nd Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment were temporarily assigned to D Company to reinforce the sector. And so, for the remainder of the 18th, the situation in Zetten remained unchanged, as the men of D Company established new defensive positions and flushed out small pockets of German paratroopers hiding amongst the houses and orchards. This the company did until 05:30 on the 19th, when the Germans suddenly resumed their attempt to secure Zetten. Like the previous day, the Germans attacked from the north and very quickly overran the first line of British defences. However, in making their way into the town centre, the Germans struggled to make any progress, as the men of D Company fought hard to hold their line and launched immediate counter-attacks to retake any ground they lost. It was during this fighting that Corporal Hugh Mansfield was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, as he and a group of 8 British soldiers held off multiple attempts by the enemy to secure the house they were defending. Eventually, 3 of the soldiers became wounded, leaving Corporal Mansfield and the 5 others as the only able-bodied men holding the house. Realising this, the corporal sought to locate reinforcements to strengthen the position, as the citation for his Distinguished Conduct Medal recounts. Corporal Mansfield, appreciating the seriousness of his position and that help was very badly needed, then, with complete disregard for his personal safety, dashed out into the road, which was being subjected to a murderous fire by both our own troops and those of the enemy, and succeeded in reaching company headquarters. By this very gallant action, this non-commissioned officer was able to get a section of infantry back to his position. This was successful in stopping the enemy from overrunning the position. Whilst D Company battled to hold Zetten, 8 Canadian Sherman tanks, again from the 6th Armoured Regiment, were deployed from reserve to give support to the British infantry. Arriving in town at approximately 0900, these tanks paired up with the troops of D Company, and over the next few hours they moved together from house to house and street to street, driving the enemy back. As with the day prior, the arrival of the Shermans proved to be a turning point in the battle, and by late afternoon on the 19th, the German advance had once again run out of steam, and both sides went over to the defensive, with northern Zetten remaining in German hands, and the rest of the town under British control. In anticipation for a third German attempt to seize the town, D Company was pulled out of Zetten that night, and replaced by A and B companies of the 1st Leicesters and elements of the 2nd Gloucesters. As expected, the Germans launched another assault against Zetten at 0700 on the 20th of January. Almost immediately though, this attack was subjected to heavy British fire, and by 0800 the German command had called it off. Shortly afterwards, the 49th West Riding Division responded by launching a 2-battalion operation aimed at clearing northern Zetten and the ground beyond to the Lynn Canal. Supported by the Sherman tanks of the Canadian 6th Armoured Regiment, the 2nd Battalion of the South Wales Borderers, and the 2nd Battalion of the Essex Regiment, passed through the British positions in Zetten just after 0800 and advanced out to the north. On the left, the 2nd South Wales Borderers achieved most of its objectives, and by nightfall on the 20th, it had established itself in the hamlet of Hemmen, where it came under heavy fire from a castle that the Germans had turned into a strongpoint. Simultaneously, over on the right, the 2nd Essex Regiment advanced through and cleared the northern suburbs of Zetten. The next day, on the 21st of January, the battalion continued its advance, and by 1400 it had forced the Germans to the northern bank of the Lynn Canal. As they did so, the 2nd Borderers attacked and secured the Hemmen Castle, taking some 300 German prisoners of war. With this, the operation to clear the area north of Zetten was successfully achieved, and the German threat to the town was completely removed. Reflecting on the battle, the history of the Leicestershire Regiment concludes. It was later learnt that no less than 12 enemy companies were committed to the battle, some of whom had been thrown into the fray 2 or 3 times. The Germans had made a very determined attempt to capture Zetten, their object presumably being to break through and destroy the Nijmegen Bridge. The 1st Battalion casualties during this action were 60 killed, wounded and missing. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe so that you never miss one of my future videos.